On today's show, baseball is back, but not necessarily in the way that you might prefer, with the Dodgers and Cubs kicking off their series in Japan. But don't worry, we still got some Padres stuff to talk about, including Michael King being named as the opening day starter, some of my thoughts on the remaining players to fill out the rest of this lineup, some extension talk between some of the stars of this Padres team, and a whole lot more. So let's get to it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Tuesday, March 18th. As always, I'm your host, who sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Arraez. You can follow me on Twitter/X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Not gonna lie, been a little bit quiet on those accounts. I'll start ramping up as we actually get to Padres opening day. Don't worry, but overall, been a little bit quiet on there, so my apologies, folks. But today's episode, no apology for this, guys. Let me tell you, it is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use Locked On MLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Let me tell you, the vibes are okay. The vibes are okay right now when it comes to the Padres, I think. We talked about this on yesterday's show that basically ever since that Nick Pivetta signing, man, everything has been really just a lot easier. And then the Jose Iglesias signing was very good too. Probably the second best signing in the offseason. So good vibes overall. I just want to quickly just mention, Dodgers and Cubs did play. Padres and Dodgers famously played last year, the series in Seoul. Look, we're not going to be talking too much about the Dodgers on this podcast until we actually face them. I actually have a little bit of a roundtable for you guys coming out next week with the rest of the NL West hosts talking about, NL West stuff. So you can look forward to that. But in general, Dodgers won 4-1. I think Yoshinobu Yamamoto is probably, before the season started, probably one of my Cy Young picks. Not that he did amazing or anything, but pretty cool nonetheless that baseball is just back in some form. Even if it is super, super early and I'm waking up, lying in my bed, seeing it on my phone and whatnot, still very cool that baseball is back, and soon it will be Padres back. Well, let's not waste any more time. Let's talk about some of the news that's been happening. Michael King, officially named by Mike Schilt the opening day starter. He's going to face the Atlanta Braves in the kickoff series against Atlanta's Chris Sale. Actually got a little bit of a Twitter question from Travis Austin Myers at @LO_Padres. He tweeted at me asking, does this tell us that Dylan Cease is going to be traded? And I was surprised by that question because that is not at all what I garnered from that announcement. Instead, I think that the only thing we know is that Yu Darvish, Michael King, and Dylan Cease were the contenders for the opening day starting gig, I guess, if you want to call it. And Yu Darvish has been, of course, dealing with a little bit of fatigue. He's a little bit tired right now. I will tell you that does make me nervous that we haven't started the season. I know that they're calling it mild fatigue, but still, we know how sports teams can be, and we especially know how the Padres can be with the health stuff. But that's definitely a little bit of a worry, but I understand why they didn't want to put Darvish out there. So it totally makes sense. And Michael King really has been just kind of the guy. I think he's been the best pitcher on this team over the last year, basically, in most metrics, I'd say, in terms of ERA, consistency. I think the only question that I'll have for him is, and it's a really small one, which is just, can he do it again? We don't really have any granular statistics that make me nervous about Michael King. All this stuff is incredible. The only thing that happened last year was at the beginning of the season, he was giving up way too many home runs. That's basically it. I believe he was second or third in Major League Baseball, and Joe Musgrove was number 2 or number 1 in home runs allowed in that first month of the season. But basically from then onwards, Michael King, there's a reason why he finished top 7 in Cy Young voting. He was just that good. I think that Michael King, it's just that question, right? Because all we saw was as he progressed throughout the rest of the season, he figured out his pitch mix a lot better, right? Is he going to be a guy that has a little bit of a ramp up? That's not impossible. Wouldn't shock me if maybe, teams are figuring out some of the things that he did last year and they're like, all right, he's got to adjust. But the stuff itself, I didn't see anything that suggested this guy is going to struggle, really. I'm really, really excited about Michael King this year. 5 ERA in March and April. And then after that, here's his ERA by month. 3, 2.67, 1.82, 2.73, 1.57. Pretty outrageous stuff, right? And it wasn't really all that luck-based. Got a lot of strikeouts. I'm really, really excited. So Michael King is the opening day starter against a team that he dominated the last time, of course, in the playoffs, the Atlanta Braves. Now, we know not to overreact to opening day starts, but don't be surprised if he gets hit up a little bit just because the Braves, literally everything went wrong from them last year in terms of their lineup, and they were still a pretty okay team that did hit a lot of home runs. So what I mentioned in the first part here about Michael King giving up a lot of home runs to start the season, again, since he is a little bit of a unproven starter commodity, not an overall player. He's been very good for a lot of years now. But in terms of the beginning, I would be curious. Is he going to be a little bit like last year where he has to kind of get into the groove, figure out how much he wants to throw his fastball, how much he wants to throw the change, all that sort of stuff. Maybe that's what we see in that first game. But overall, makes total sense, and I do not see this as any reason that Dylan Cease is going to be traded. I think that Dylan Cease, I maintain my position, which is that Preller is definitely taking calls, because of the crazy amount of money restrictions and the uncertainty of the future, whether it be ownership, whether it be TV deals, or it just be the overall roster that already has contract extensions for Joe Musgrove, Yu Darvish, Jay Cronenworth, Fernando Tatis Jr., Manny Machado, Xander Bogaerts. There's so many players on this team already extended for a long time that the money sort of and the plan, I should say, for the money going forward is up in the air. I think that Michael King, and we're going to talk about this later with the extension talk, I think that Dylan Cease, it has to be a big offer. It has to be. I think Baltimore's like the only team that could do it. They're the only team outside maybe the Yankees, maybe if the Mets get a little bit desperate, depending on how their health stuff shakes out with their pitching rotation. Overall, I just don't see him trading him unless he gets like a really big offer that gives him young, controllable players. And that's what AJ Preller likes. He wants control. If you actually look at the majority of trades that they've done over the past few years, he doesn't do these trades just for 1 year. Right? Like, that's actually not something that he does, right? Luis Arraez, Michael King, Dylan Cease, even Blake Snell, Yu Darvish. The big kind of players that you've seen on this team that they trade for, even Juan Soto, are not players that he trades for that he's only going to have for 1 year. And certainly not for half a season, with the exception of your Mitch Morelands, Trevor Rosenthal's, what's his face, Tanner Scott last year, right? But overall, that's all I see. I don't think this signals anything. Dylan Cease is probably going to start the second game, and he's probably going to be great, right? So that's all we have to hope for. But very, very cool for Michael King, one of the best stories of the Padres all of last year. It's my only question is, can he do it again? I didn't see anything with the stuff. Didn't see anything with the advanced stats, nothing in peripherals. And that's kind of rare, I think, for Padres pitching, where we're kind of just like, yeah, we know what we're getting here. We know that this guy's good. And that's really, really exciting. Joe Musgrove was also like that. We knew what we were getting once we got into that second year. Very exciting stuff. Cannot wait to see it go down. That's a really fun first game, by the way. Michael King versus Chris Sale. It's a really good one. I feel like the past few years, the opening day game hasn't always been awesome for the Padres. Not always. I don't know what it is, but Atlanta's going to be a tough test, so we'll see how that pans out. In terms of other news, just a tiny thing that I want to bring up. Alex Verdugo hasn't received a contract offer, according to reports, and I just want to talk about that because, being a left fielder, it's not impossible that you end up hearing about Alex Verdugo at some point this season. I also want to point out, yes, if everybody wants to be upset at the Dodgers and spending, I agree. Be mad at the Red Sox for giving up Mookie Betts for this guy and two players that have not made really any time in the majors. And what was it? Connor Wong and Jeter Downs, I think, were the other ones. Just absolutely insane. But overall, just keep him on your radar that if anything were to happen, that Verdugo could be a player that the Padres look into. Not very good last year. Do not get me wrong. Let me be very clear. He's a very bad player last year. But he was also like weirdly bad last year, and he'd actually been like a serviceable outfielder before that. 2.1 WAR in 2019, 1.6 in 2020, 1.9 the year after, 1.1 after that, 1.4 the year after that. It's possible that a team's going to be like, you know what, a 29-year-old, we'll give him a shot because he's been okay before. Especially a Padres team that is currently looking like they might give Gavin Sheets an opening day roster spot, which we're going to talk about after the break, guys. But first, in this break, we got to talk about one of our sponsors. And one of our sponsors, guys, it's a brand spanking new one. You know I love new sponsors because new sponsors always keep the lights on and the camera rolling. And let me tell you, when it comes to fueling your body, quality matters. That's why our friends at Just Ingredients are changing the game with clean, high-quality products designed to support better health and peak performance. Just Ingredients offers an NSF-certified line of protein powder, electrolytes, pre-workout, and creatine, all rigorously tested to ensure they're free from substances banned by major athletic organizations. Just Ingredients has also partnered with two-time MVP Bryce Harper, who trusts their NSF-certified sports line to fuel his training and recovery. And how can you disagree with that, with how good Bryce Harper's been, man? That's what you got to do. What a model of consistency and health, and frankly, freakish health. My God, you want to talk about these athletes sometimes? Bryce Harper's up there. And let me tell you, it's really, really great. I just love always monitoring my ingredients, monitoring what I'm doing as I am trying to be healthy. And sometimes not even in the minimizing my gut and my circular figure. I mean more of like just trying to have things that are healthy for me, things that are going to make me feel better, get through the day, and not wear me down and make me feel like a potato, I guess. Almost like mental hygiene, not mental nutritional health. Does that make any sense? I don't think it does, but that's why the people over at Just Ingredients are the real experts, guys. Just visit them at justingredients.us and use code LOCKEDONMLB for 20% off. And for more wellness tips, follow at just.ingredients on Instagram as well. And also, we got another sponsor that we got to talk about in this break, and that is our other friends that we've heard about and you heard at the top of the show at Monarch Money. If you ever check your bank account and wonder where did all your money go, online shopping, dining out, all of it, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money, it's not just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. They've got all these different insights, a good collaboration. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, stay on the same page without the stress. It's really, really great. You can plan long-term goals, track all of your different spending on all these accounts. It's really, really great, guys. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. And also, if you use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com, you'll get 50% off. 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. Go check it out. And just like that, everybody, we are back here in the Locked On Padres podcast, thriving and most certainly vibing here, everybody. We talked about this on yesterday's show. And that was the Matt Waldron news, that Matt Waldron has a little bit of an oblique thing and he's going to be out for the start of the season, removing him from the competition for the 5th spot, which is a shame. We always like seeing some good competition out here. It's kind of stinks that we've had two members that were potentially vying for that 5th spot in both Matt Waldron and Brian Hoeing that were taking out of it purely because of the injuries. Now, I understand that Matt Waldron didn't have the best start his last time out, right? He had a little bit of struggles. I still believe he can be a piece. But when it comes to Matt Waldron being out of contention there, it feels very much like it's Kyle Hart versus Stephen Kolek for this last spot. And there was actually a piece on Stephen Kolek that I actually recommend everyone checking out by AJ Cassavell on MLB Network. And it was kind of cool that they talked about like this collaboration, right, that he's had with Michael King because some of their pitch mixes are similar. Very, very cool, right? They both use, the same type of pitches with two fastballs, solid changeup, sweeper, cutter, kind of have the same pitch mix. The difference is that obviously Michael King has kind of perfected his mix in a lot of ways, while Stephen Kolek has not. And I have talked about on this show that one of the leading reasons that I think that he's been a candidate is because he produces an extremely high ground ball rate, which is pretty much always a good thing when you're a starting pitcher. Now, that does not mean that you're going to be a great pitcher compared to some of the rest, right? Usually if you're only pitching for ground balls, you're not going to be all that amazing unless your name is Logan Webb, right? Like that's a good example of an extreme ground ball pitcher who keeps making it work, right? And the only reason that guy's ERA is a little bit inflated is because the Giants defense has struggled over the past few years. But overall, I like this piece. I like this kind of vibe, right? This kind of vibe with the collaboration with the Padres, right? You've seen Joe Musgrove the other day, that he was a coach for the spring breakout team, right? And you see this piece and they're talking about how Ruben Niebla really encourages his guys, all talking to each other. Michael King gladly stepping in and saying, I think this guy has some of the best stuff in baseball, right? Like, I've liked this camaraderie amongst pitching. And I think that has to be attributed to, at least in a good amount, to Ruben Niebla and his culture that he's fostering. Because, guys, it's not that long ago that we were looking at a lot of Padres starting pitching and just pitching in general. And we were like, this is kind of a mess. This is one of the things I talked about on my episode a few weeks ago about the Padres' ability to accrue talent at the back end of their rotation and frankly even their bullpen too. That once upon a time, I know sources in Major League Baseball that were like, target Padres development, like target their pitchers because they don't know what they're doing over there. And with the development of the pitching lab and with the bringing on of Ruben Niebla, I really feel like this pitching staff has been a lot better. And it's a little bit of an underrated storyline, I think, about the Padres as a team and a culture, is that they are kind of shedding that belief about their starting pitching. Now, when it comes to the stars and scrubs of the general lineup, yeah, that's not always the best, but I think that with the pitching, it's great. And I just love to see this. And I think that overall, I want to bring this up as well, just a quick tangent, is that this team has been the subject of a lot of locker room stuff over the past few seasons, right? Whether it be Manny Machado and Fernando Tatis Jr., whether it be just, frankly, Manny Machado in general, whether it be, some other sort of players on this team, whether it be the manager with Bob Melvin or Jace Tingler, whatever it may be, there's been a lot of controversy, and usually but with the 2021 and 2023 seasons, you got like giant expose articles talking about the culture and whatnot. And don't get me wrong, these things can be, things are probably very true. Like Kevin Acee quoted like 20-something people. He talked with so many people. But I think that one of the things that happens is there is a degree of, yes, at times, yes, I do think that this can be a little bit overrated, right? I do think that some of the locker room stuff with the Padres can be overrated. But there are other times where I don't think it is. And I think that it's very fair to look at that and say, you know what? I think that like Manny Machado, like some of his comments that he made about why do I have to go out and do this? We're not in college anymore. And you start to wonder, do they lack a little bit of a locker room leader? Or at least a clubhouse leaders, maybe we'll say plural. But I think that a lot of times those reports, it's not that they're made up, it's not that they're over-exaggerating necessarily, but I think they get examined a little bit too much because this is a team that, let's be honest, is not in the biggest market. So therefore, it's a lot easier to crap on teams like this and not praise the fact that they're spending money in the first place and instead harp on, look at these idiots, they tried to do this and it didn't work. That's what you guys deserve, right? When the Dodgers do this, it's totally fine. When the other teams, overpay for players, it's totally fine. With the Padres, how many narratives have we seen over the past few years that are about how are they doing this? How are they affording it? And I do think it gets overstated sometimes. I really do. Because overall, guess what? When you have a team with a bunch of stars and they really underperform, I don't think it's a locker room issue. I think it's just frustration. That's just what's going to happen. So I don't think that that's an epidemic, per se, with this Padres team. And that's what this kind of reminded me of, is that I'm seeing all this collaboration. Joe Musgrove still being there, still being a presence on this team, despite being out for the year. He really has like the heart and soul vibe of this Padres team. And I love to see that very, very much. We'll see how it pans out in terms of this last part of the rotation between Kyle Hart and Stephen Kolek. I'm suspecting a little bit of it's just going to go back and forth. Like, I don't think it's going to be a 6-man rotation, but I could see them using Stephen Kolek to start, right? Like, to start off the season, depending on how he does. I think this 5th spot is not going to be set in stone for basically all season, right? Like, I think Randy Vasquez can make some starts. And I like Randy Vasquez more as a long-inning reliever personally, but I think it could happen, right? And we'll see how it happens. Last thing before we kind of, continue talking about contract extensions in some depth is Luis Arraez hitting 429 this spring. He actually, it's funny, the other day, yesterday's game, the Padres went kind of off. Let me tell you, they went kind of crazy. It was a really, really wild game against the Brewers of all teams, my favorite, of course, for longtime listeners, But the Padres won by a score of 14-8, and it didn't feature necessarily all the stars that we're used to. No Jackson Merrill, no Manny Machado, no Fernando Tatis Jr. moments. I mean, they played, right? At least in the case of Merrill and Tatis. I believe Tatis played in yesterday's game. Did he? No, I don't think he did, actually. Did he? Yeah, he did. Okay, I was wrong. But it wasn't like them being the big stars. Luis Arraez hitting 429 this season so far. I talked about this a few weeks ago, that Arraez is one of those rare players where I actually do kind of care a little bit about his spring training stats, only because this isn't the ebbs and flows of baseball with him, because he is a guy that's always going to be swinging, always going to be making contact. So I kind of like seeing him get hits, and seeing him hit 429, seeing him talk about his thumb and whatnot. I'm really expecting a big season out of Luis Arraez, and I think that, it's been mentioned in multiple reports. You can follow Dennis Lin on Twitter. Like, I think AJ Preller and company are really excited, and I think they value him a little bit higher than other teams in Major League Baseball. I do think it depends, right? Like, it depends on what your team makeup is. But I think if Arraez is your, let's say, you got Tatis, Manny, Jackson Merrill, if he's your 4th batter, it's not the worst in the world, right? Like, it could be a lot better. And not to mention, there's some upside with some other guys on this team as well, with your Xander Bogaerts, with whoever ends up in left field. You've got some potential with those guys being good. I think he has a lot more value on this team. But overall, love to see him doing this, especially with the injury. He says, I've gotten a whole new thumb. Love to see that. But I will tell you, some people might be worried about, are certain players going to make this team that we don't like? Yesterday, Yuli Gurriel homered, and he ripped a double that allowed 2 players to score as well. Gavin Sheets also scored on a wild pitch. Oscar Gonzalez had a double in this game. Just Brett Sullivan had a big one in this game. Like, a lot of the under the radar kind of Padres options. In some case, I think underperforming / under replacement level players in the case of Yuli Gurriel. I've talked about this. I really don't want Yuli Gurriel to make the team, or not that I don't want him to make the team. I just don't, that is not who I would pick personally. I just don't think he's been a good player in a while. He's really, really old. And frankly, I've talked about this before, the controversy with Darvish. I understand Darvish said it's no problem. They talked to him about it weeks before the signing. It just feels like an unnecessary element to add, right? Like, I just don't like it. I don't agree with it. But overall, I don't think Gurriel's making this. I just don't see it. I would be really, really surprised. And it would be really, not only would it be damning, it'd be damning in both directions. It'd be damning against the Padres, who, it's not like they've been good at this. When you look at the big picture of the Padres accumulating and producing lineup depth, when it comes to the old veterans, they've kind of had misses every time, with the exception of last year with Jurickson Profar, with Donovan Solano, right? Higgy, I don't count as he was like an afterthought. Like, you just got a backup catcher. I don't know if they signed him thinking this would be a big deal, because Luis Campusano was the starter last year. But in general, Matt Carpenter, Nelson Cruz, Robinson Cano, just some of these guys, I'm just not with it. I don't think it's going to be a success story. They haven't proven to me that I should be like, oh, they see something here. Instead, I'm like, they just brought in some guy and they're hoping that it turns out well. I don't know. I don't know if he's going to make the team for sure. I don't think he will, but we'll have to see how it shapes out. I think in general, we've got an interesting collection of players to follow over this next, what is it going to be? 7 days. Hold on. No, I can't count. 9 days until opening day. And we're going to talk about them, as well as some contract extension talk in just 1 second, guys. But first, one more word from our sponsors. You guys know what time it is, folks. It's time to talk about the place that keeps you going. The place that makes sure that you are stacked to the max. And that is our good friends over at Supply House, which gets you the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades. Whether you're into plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need, delivered fast from coast to coast. And if you need help with an order, Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage, and now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. And check this out. If you use the program SH5 for 5% off your first order, be sure to do that. That's supplyhouse.com. Go check it out. And just like that, everybody, we are back winding down this Soul podcast, or winding down that. We're in the waning moments. We're not done just yet. I want to talk a little bit about just all the options real quick with this Padres team, and then the extension talk, contract extension predictions by not just yours truly, but by The Athletic. So let's first talk about the guys. Oscar Gonzalez, Gavin Sheets, Tirso Noas, Connor Joe, Jason Hayward, Eggy Rosario, Tyler Wade, Jose Iglesias, and Yuli Gurriel. I think I am personally pretty confident. I know that Dennis Lin was projecting it, but I think Tyler Wade is out. I just don't understand. I don't understand why you would have Tyler Wade on this team when you signed Jose Iglesias. I don't get it. I do think it might not bode well for Eggy Rosario, which I don't like, because I think Eggy Rosario could be a real nice weapon, not just because he has a pretty decent glove, but also a guy that you platoon every now and then. He's absolutely crushed lefties. I would like that, because you know who's not very good at lefties? Jake Cronenworth. You know who you could put at second base sometimes? Eggy Rosario. So if on those days, if Cronenworth does not perform back to being not a horrible, not a horrible hitter against lefties, but 90 WRC plus for his career compared to a 120 against righties, I think that might make sense. And it's a lot of power too. Eggy Rosario's got some pop. He hit a lot of home runs last year, but he cannot hit the righties nearly as much. But I wouldn't mind having that as a specialist type of player. At least I know something that he could be pretty good at, and there's some upside for him to get better as a young guy. Tirso Ornelas, I've talked about this too. Can he just be a decent hitter? Am I confident that Jason Hayward and Connor Joe is just some platoon that's going to win you games, that you're going to be really excited? Do winning teams tend to do that? I don't know. But I will say this. I think Jason Hayward has shown in the spring so far. I just think that the bat is just totally gone. I really do. I think the Dodgers might have squeezed the last amount of offense he had out of him that one year. I believe it was in 2023. I don't see it. Right, he had that 1 year with the Dodgers, 120 WRC plus. He all of a sudden figured out how to hit. But it was also a little bit like he outperformed his expectations, right? His 30% higher bump in his expected stats when it came to that season. And then last year, 94 WRC plus. He was struggling a bit. He hit 211 last year. He's hitting 120 right now in spring training, 14 WRC plus. I understand he could be a solid defender, and with that defense, it could be one of the better defensive outfields in Major League Baseball. But to me, if you're not losing too much with Tirso, with Connor Joe maybe, because at least Connor Joe could play first base, gives you a little bit of positional flexibility, I don't think Jason Hayward's going to last on this team very long. I really don't. I think that this is a guy who might be the opening day left fielder. I could see that. But overall, I think that the upside is just a little bit too tantalizing for the rest of these guys that I'm like, is Jason Hayward going to be like unbelievable defensively? Like unbelievable, where it's like Kevin Kiermaier level. And you're like, okay, I get it. Because in left field, he hasn't played nearly as much left field in his career. In fact, the last time he played left field was a little bit for the Astros in 2024, and then a tiny bit for the Dodgers, only 25 innings in left field. But overall, when it comes to the outfield, last season, across all positions, he had 5 defensive runs saved, 2 outs above average. Year before that, 6 outs above average. That's really, really good. But is it enough to potentially keep him in the outfield if he's putting up Trent Grisham numbers? I don't know, folks. That I'm not sure of. And I know a lot of people don't want to see that again, because that's really hard to explain to fans, where you're like, why are we starting a guy with no competition every day? Like for 3 years in center field when he hits below 200. That was Grisham. I don't think it's going to be that bad. I think the Padres learned their lesson from that, but we shall see. And then when it comes to Gavin Sheets, I just don't think you can ignore this. I don't think you can ignore Oscar Gonzalez either with some of the power he's been putting up. I think one of them probably gets a little bit of bat. But as it's happened many times before, whether it be Rougned Odor, whether it be David Dahl, these guys don't necessarily last forever. But I could see them being guys that start, or at least have some of a chance, until maybe the first month of the season's done. Lastly, let's talk about contract predictions. Contract predictions, it was predicted on The Athletic that Jackson Merrill would be about a 15-year, $375 million extension. Dylan Cease, 7 years, $210. And while Michael King, we don't have that just yet, I think he'd probably be getting something in the Robbie Ray, Kevin Gausman range, right? Something along those lines, maybe $100 million or so, maybe a little bit more than that. I believe Kevin Gausman was about 111. I could see it only because he doesn't have the same track record as a Dylan Cease, right? So I could see that happening. Gausman, same sort of thing, where it took a while for him to break out. Same thing with Michael King. Here's what I'll say. First of all, I think that the Jackson Merrill one is a little bit high, but I could be wrong, because they might be looking at Julio Rodriguez, right? Julio Rodriguez signed a huge extension that gives him at minimum around like 200, but in total, it's probably going to amount to like 400 million, basically, right? So in somewhere in the middle, that's maybe what you could see here. I could see a little bit of 300, but I don't know about you guys. I understand right? Everyone wants to lock up the great player, but it's still only one season. It was one incredible season. But as we talked about with Michael Bauman a few weeks ago, about Jackson Merrill and the lack of a walk rate and some of the players he compares to, it's not like he's a, super just impenetrable prospect. This is not like when we watched Bryce Harper and Mike Trout their first few years, right? Where you were like, yeah, these guys are crazy. This is going to be awesome. Even Tatis to an example, because Tatis walked a lot more, hit for a whole lot more power. So to me, I think that Michael King, if you had to choose between all of these, would be the priority, because I don't think he costs nearly as much as Dylan Cease, because Dylan Cease's agent is Scott Boras. Not excited about all that. And then you have Jackson Merrill. My thing is, guys, there's too many players extended on this team right now. You want to have some flexibility. I would love to lock him up. And I understand that Jackson Merrill, the longer you wait, the more he may end up costing in free agency. But you should accept the fact that they have him under control for a long time. I'm not trying to be a jerk and say that I love, I absolutely adore the arbitration system and how predatory it can be against major league players. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that overall, what I think is you should use the advantage that you have when you've already signed all these other guys. I don't think it's that bad. And frankly, anyone who makes fun of the Padres, or I should say, criticizes the Padres for this, I think would be extraordinarily unfair. And I actually don't think you'll see it that much, because they've rarely gone to arbitration. Michael King was the first player they went to arbitration hearings, I should say, or they almost did, I should say. That they didn't figure out arbitration. They figured it out, though. They did a deal with him. We talked about it this offseason. That they hadn't had anything like that in 10 years, right? Like, this is a team that does well by its players. And if anyone wants to start attacking the Padres because they don't want to extend Jackson Merrill immediately, I think that's ridiculous. Like, they already have all these other contracts. They're one of the rare teams in Major League Baseball where it's like, actually, I get why you guys aren't spending money right now. You've already spent a lot. So I think that they're kind of immune from those conversations in a lot of ways for the time being, depending on, we'll see how the ownership thing stakes out. It seems like we're doing okay, especially after the Pivetta signing. But overall, I just would not extend Jackson Merrill right now. I want to see more. It's way too bullish on a prospect to be jumping on all over this already. I know he could cost less, but I don't know. I just, I know some people, this has been talked about, that this is how prospects go these days, that teams like extending them before they enter the big free agency. I get that. But to me, you already have too many players extended. And fundamentally, you need roster flexibility. And Jackson Merrill, it's not impossible that he regresses to some degree. Even Tatis, post-extension, he had the one near MVP season, and ever since then, health issues has arisen. Off the field stuff has arisen. I'm not saying I think that that's what's going to happen with Jackson Merrill. It's just you never know. And to conclude it this way, you know why Michael King should be more of the priority? Because Dylan Cease, again, I think that Scott Boras, that's just not a team, that's not a player that they are going to be able to negotiate on with right now because of their financials and because it's Boras. He's going to want him to test free agency, and he could end up being the best overall pitcher available on the market next season. You need Michael King. You know why? Because after this year, you're going to have Musgrove coming off of TJ. You're going to have Darvish, who we already talked about. He's having fatigue issues. He's old. And then Nick Pivetta, hopefully, right? You have that. And then what else, right? Like, that's the issue. You need a little bit of an anchor. So I think Michael King is going to be the guy to keep an eye on. I think that's who you have to extend. I am totally fine with using the arbitration years, taking advantage of that. He's going to go up in salary, especially if he continues what he did last year. He's going to be a player that costs more per year, but you don't have to worry about the giant extension just yet. And I think that that's okay. I don't want to be super locked into anybody right now until we have a better idea of what this farm system looks like, about what the ownership looks like. And I think Preller knows that too. And I think that they're working on it. And I think that we, need to be very careful, tread very lightly, which what you do with these upcoming extensions and whatnot. But that's just my early thoughts on all of that. And that's my early thoughts on a bunch of things. And that's it for today's edition of Locked On Padres podcast, guys. The only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast from. Follow me on Twitter/X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. I promise I'll be more active when the season starts. I'm still on like social media vacation, if that makes sense. Tomorrow's episode, we're going to be talking about Manny Machado's career arc with the Padres and talking a little bit projecting him for 2025 and talk about him as like a personality and a player. And whether or not, is he kind of becoming underrated? We're going to talk about all of that, guys. Possibly my buddy Miller Thomas and I are going to talk about disappointments for this upcoming year and a whole lot more. But until that next time, stay safe and, of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies, take care.